Mr. Speaker, will you please call the House to order?
The bill is passed.
We'd like to get a budget that represents the interests of the people who are standing here with me now.
To be part of the struggle to achieve a better society for all.
And that's why today I'm very pleased to cast my vote in the affirmative. Thank you.
Hello and welcome to Assembly Update. I'm Liz Koenig. Following the tragic limousine crash in Schoharie County last fall, our guest, Assemblyman Angelo Santabarbara, has introduced legislation to improve safety standards in the limousine industry. And we're going to be talking about that today. And joining me now is our guest, Assemblyman Angelo Santabarbara, who represents the 111th Assembly District, Albany, Schenectady, and Montgomery counties. Thanks for coming in today.
Thanks, Liz. Thanks for having me back on the show.
Yeah, this, as I mentioned, it's really horrible, horrible tragedy that occurred out in Schoharie County. And it affected primarily like the city of Amsterdam and the folks in Schoharie, obviously, but throughout the whole capital region. I think you couldn't speak to one person who didn't know somebody, was connected some way to someone who was a victim of this terrible, terrible crash. Can you talk a little bit about the impact that this had on the community?
And that's exactly right what you said. There was just a devastating impact, certainly in the Amsterdam community, but this is one of the worst transportation disasters we've seen in nearly a decade. And what it's still very hard to talk about. Something that continues to linger in our community. Thoughts of this accident, of this crash. That we want to take action to improve limousine safety standards, and that's what some of these bills that we're going to be talking about today are aimed at doing. But the need for updating safety regulations was very, very apparent. So this year, we've seen a number of measures already enacted in the state budget. There's a number of bills that I've introduced that I hope to advance before the end of this session.
And what was included in the budget in the way of limousine safety?
A number of measures, as I said, was included in the state budget. There's certainly more to do, but it's a good start. There was a number of items, increasing criminal penalties, of course, for operating these limousines, the carriers, making sure that they're following the strictest standards. There's increased penalties, civil penalties, higher fines for operating without DOT authorization and by DOT regulations. A couple of other measures I'll just mention. State police and DOT now have the authority to retrieve plates for limos that are out of compliance. Very important to make sure those plates are taken. And the Department of Motor Vehicles can also refuse or revoke registrations for limos that don't meet the federal safety standards. So these are very important provisions that were included in the state budget. If there are a number of other items in there. One of the particular items I want to point out is things like prohibiting, and we're going to talk about this in one of my bills, prohibiting U-turns and things like that. We're going to look at cell phone use, number of other safety-related regulations that I think are very important for the safe operation of these large vehicles.
And the license plate component I find interesting, because I know that the limousine in question in the tragedy in Schoharie had failed inspection a few times.
Yes, so there was a number of things that, as the investigation continued, a number of things that we saw that needed improvement. These are, when you're talking about high capacity vehicles, buses come to mind, other vehicles come to mind. They should be adhering to the strictest of regulations, and a lot of the provisions that were included in the budget, again, a good start. I got some additional bills that I think will push that a little further. One of those bills is creating a task force, and I hope to get some experts on that task force to give us some guidance on what other legislation is needed, what safety improvements are needed. Through this particular piece of legislation, the Commissioner of DOT and the Commissioner of Department of Motor Vehicles will serve as co-chairs. So we're also looking for some coordination between these agencies when it comes to the regulation of stretch limousines. Something that needs to be improved, something that we want to get everybody on the same page. But the whole point of having this task force is also to get experts in the field, experts that know about vehicles like this, experts that can report back, do investigations on legislation that has been passed and legislation that may be needed. I know that the Senate is going to be having a number of hearings coming up. I hope to get some information out of those hearings as well. But again, the aim of all this is to improve safety standards, to make sure that we're adhering to the strictest of standards, and to make sure they're equally applied and that those standards are enforced.
And you mentioned the commissioners. Who else would be serving on the task force? What information would they provide?
There will be a number of people appointed. I'm hoping to get some experts appointed to this task force. Once the legislation is passed, we will specify who will be serving, but people that have a good knowledge of how these vehicles operate. Again, these are vehicles that are modified, vehicles that have entirely different structures than regular sized vehicles. So we really have to have experts that have an understanding, and also maybe people that can, they can get into the operation of these vehicles, how they operate, to look at braking systems, to look at the structural integrity, to give advice. And they will be tasked, this task force will be tasked with issuing a report, giving information back to the legislature so that we can look at these recommendations and see what legislation or funding or whatever the case may be to implement some of these measures. So that's a very important bill because I think it really can give us a lot of good information as to where we're heading with safety standards for limousines in New York State.
Now, will there be information available to the public? Will there be a database?
Now yes, and that's the second bill. A couple of other bills that beyond this bill, a couple other bills that I wanted to talk about. One was having a comprehensive review. We really need to know who's operating these limousines in New York State. How many are there? Where are they located? How many employees? And start to develop a database, start to collect this information, find out which vehicles are on the road, which vehicles are not, which vehicles need to be seized. If they're not on the road, if they're out of compliance, there's no sense in them sitting around. Those vehicles need to be taken and ensure that we need to ensure that they don't ever get back on the road. But part of this also is providing the consumer information. When I was a civil engineer before I was elected to the Assembly, there was a database, Office of Professions, run by the State Education Department. They had a number of licenses listed on this database, this website, where you could check a person's record before hiring them. So if someone wanted to hire an engineer or an architect or whatever the case may be, the number of professions listed on there, they could look at that person, the company, or the individual's license to see if there's any violations, to see if there's any past violations, any issues with the license, if the license has been suspended, if the license is current. A number of pieces of information that are very important to the consumer. It's about consumer protection and knowing. And when it comes to the limousine industry, that information is not so easily available. So me as a consumer, where do I go if I want to check to make sure this driver has an up-to-date license, has the correct license, has a vehicle that's been inspected, it's passed inspection? This is all very important information that I want to know before I hire somebody. So the second bill calls for, the first bill is collecting the data, but also making this information transparent, easily available, and doing it in a similar fashion that we have done with other licensing in New York State. And in the day, in this day and age, with smartphones and technology, there's no reason not to do that, not to do this, to implement a system like this where consumers can check. And what's nice about the bill is that it also works in reverse. Now, if I hire a company and they show up and I check the database and I see that there's an expired license or some sort of violation, whatever the case may be, now I, as a consumer, have the information to report that back. So it provides better reporting, it's better policing, and it gets the bad players, it stops the bad players from operating in the state, because those companies can be identified, they can be cited and shut down before any further they serve any further they do any more business in the state of New York.
And what other measures are you working on around this issue?
There's a couple of other things. As a civil engineer, I kind of looked at this issue in a number of different ways, and one of the things I want to see implemented also is a review of some of the rural areas, some of these intersections, some of the roads. There's new technology out there on designing intersections. We've all heard about roundabouts and traffic signals and lighted traffic signals and stop signs and a number of different things that can be done. So one of the other measures that I'm working on right now is to have a periodic review of rural areas, rural roads, that can be, we're seeking improvement. They can have modern technology applied to them that may not have been available at the time the road was constructed. And we see this all the time with intersections that have a certain element to them that there could be improvements, there could be safety improvements, and are we doing enough review to make sure that we're getting back to these intersections years after they've been constructed to implement these measures? What are those measures? What would they be? Identify them and get them implemented. It's important that we have something in place to review, identify, and improve the safety of rural roads and intersections. A lot of times there's poor lighting. A lot of times we don't see modern civil engineering, modern technology implemented in these areas, but they need to be implemented. If they can be made safer, there needs to be a system in place so that we can apply this technology to these intersections. And
prom season is upon us, so this must be on the minds of a lot of people, especially parents who are thinking, geez, do I get a limousine for my kids? How safe is it? That sort of thing. Are you hearing from your constituents on this issue?
Yeah, I've heard from some of my schools. I've heard from some parents. It is a concern. I mean, people think about that. My daughter is going to be going to prom this year, and it's a concern, and certainly the database, having the information, I think would go a long way towards providing that consumer protection. And with prom season here, this is an issue that's certainly a topic of discussion. This is, again, a tragic event that will not be forgotten, something that we need to remember and think about going forward. And it also, the idea with the task force is to have it ongoing. There's always room for improvement, and we always have to strive for better regulations, better safety as it becomes available. If the intersections can be reviewed and we can provide better safety at those intersections, it needs to be an ongoing process. It can't be something that's just done with a bill or a measure that's included in the budget. It has to be ongoing, and that's the point of the task force. That's the point of some of these bills, to provide the most information we can to the consumers. And with prom season upon us, yes, it's certainly a concern. It's a concern for me, as it is for our community, for everybody else. I do want to mention, I will be rolling out my Arrive Alive. I brought one here. I'm going to show. I think, we have one there. Okay. Sure. This is also a program that I've rolled out year after year with the local schools, and it's called Arrive Alive, the No Drinking and Driving Prom Promise. And we have to remember, there's still a lot of drunk driving accidents. We want to make sure that our students, our youth, people participating in prom, make a promise, and this is a pledge to not drink and drive, not accept a ride from someone who has been drinking. That's a pledge that the student will make, and the parent, of course, is the other side of this agreement. They agree to provide a ride at any time, no questions asked. We don't want people not calling for a ride when they need it for whatever reason. So this pledge that, again, will be distributed in all my school districts. I'm encouraging people to share this with their parents, share this with the schools. It's very important. We want everybody to participate and to have fun, but we want them to do it safely.
Excuse me. Yeah, let's look on my throat. I apologize. But it's really a great program. This has been going on, I think, since I was in high school. I remember. Yeah. It's a long time ago. But yeah, very important for everybody to remain safe.
I think we have to keep that in mind. There's a number of things to keep in mind. Of course, we always as parents we always worry. But I think with having this, fostering this discussion, that's another thing this pledge does. When parents and students talk about this and take this, it also opens up that discussion. Right. That your family and friends are here for you. If you feel like you're going to be in danger, if someone's been drinking, don't accept a ride. We will be there for you. And we hope that students will participate in this coming prom season.
All your legislation being passed and making a difference. Thank you so much. We appreciate it. We've been speaking with Assemblyman Angelo Santabarbara, who represents the 111th Assembly District, Albany, Schenectady, and Montgomery counties. Thanks for joining us. See you next time.